Welcome to Complete Edition, the podcast between a PlayStation Trophy Hunter and an Xbox Achievement Hunter. This is episode 25, and we lost an episode 2 weeks ago, so it's been a month since we released, which isn't a big deal. I mean, tech issues happen all the time, but let's hope that doesn't happen again. I'm your host, Compulsive Nerd, and I am joined by AJ. How you doing, AJ?
I'm doing well, yeah. Sorry about there being no episode in a while, and I've not been on the show in a while. The last episode was the guest episode you did with Sean. I thought you did an amazing job on that show. He's great to listen to, great to talk to, super passionate about games, lovely guy. So yeah. But it sucks that we lost, the last episode because it was going pretty well. So it's frustrating, but we've gone quite a long time without having sort of serious tech issues. So it's been, we've been pretty consistent and it's been pretty smooth. So, it was only a matter of time before something sort of messed up.
Right. And, I just recorded another episode with Sean, which I'll upload probably next Monday, like the one after today, because it just like breaks up the shows. But we did a spoiler cast together just for fun on Horizon. And I was editing it and then it just right in the middle, like stops rendering. So I have to re-edit it. And so I was just like putting it aside for a little bit, but it's like tech issue after tech issue, and I just don't know what's hitting it.
Yeah, the show's cursed all of a sudden. Yeah,
yeah, for real. But have you been playing much lately?
Yeah. So when I I moved house and things were stressful, and I've started like a new role. I'm at university as a PhD researcher now, so it's been sort of quite stressful and quite fast paced. And so I'd just been watching like loads of movies and TV shows and hadn't put much energy into games, because I know when we play games, we sort of get hardcore into them, and it takes a decent amount of like mental energy, I guess, and sort of focus and time commitment and things like that. So I just felt like, TV and movies and just reading and stuff like that was just easier to do, to manage with my new schedule. But in these past 2 weeks, I've been playing games a lot more, some casually, some multiplayer stuff, which is arguably even more competitive and more sort of taxing. But yeah, so I'm really glad these past 2 weeks it's kind of come at a good time, really, this recording, because I've been getting back into games. I've found that passion again, and I'm out of the slump that I was in for a few weeks. So it's been nice.
Yeah, and you mentioned moving, and I move in a little over 3 weeks. I move May 23rd, so yeah, about a month away from now. And I'm thinking like tomorrow is a big day for me because I'll go to the furniture store and I'll start looking at furniture, and I'm gonna go to a mattress store and I'm gonna start looking at some mattresses, and it's like I actually have plans for this game room, and I'm like really, really excited about it because it's like I can have this game room with like an office and then an actual bedroom instead of like doing everything in one space. And like just the idea of like maybe getting like a shelf for all my stuff and like my posters are up. Like I'm very excited to have my own space. And you just talked about moving, and it's like it is such a big thing. So I won't be gaming much, when that starts happening. But it's still exciting, and I am, and like you said, I got out of a slump too, and I'm back in the swing of gaming, and it's really, really exciting.
It happens. It definitely, even when things aren't that stressful. I mean, usually stress is like a big one, but even just occasionally, I get into gaming slumps of a few days or a couple of weeks, and you just got to sort of ride it out and try to find something you're really passionate about to sort of draw you back in. And it happened kind of naturally as well after Elden Ring. I think we've probably talked before about how when you play like a massive time-consuming game, when you're done with it, you're kind of like, what next? Like, what do I do now? And it's, at least I do. I had that feeling with like Fallout and Skyrim and big role-playing games, and Elden Ring is like another one of those like 120-hour experiences. So you're so used to playing that game like day in, day out, that when you're done with it, you just kind of don't know what to do with yourself in terms of what to play next and sort of what to get invested in, because you've just sort of lived in that world and lived with those mechanics for so long. So yeah, that was kind of a cause as well. So it all kind of happened all at once, and was a problem for gaming. But I'm happy to be back.
Me too. I'm actually excited to see what you're chasing now that you've moved on from the game after Elden Ring, and like how that's treating you.
Yeah. So yeah, the first thing to cover is, I finished Elden Ring a few weeks ago. Loved it, great game. It did hold up. I remember having an open question about that when I talked about the game last, because I think I was still early or sort of in the mid game at that point, and I wasn't sure if it would retain its level of quality, but I think it does. There's a great video on the game analysis by Joseph Anderson that came out. It's really fantastic in terms of covering everything in the game, and his thoughts kind of mirror my own somewhat. So I won't reiterate all of them, but for me, the game has some repetition towards the end, but I think the repetition kind of works. I know all the Soulsborne games do this to some extent, I think, and it kind of shows how far you've come when like an early game boss becomes like a late game like regular enemy. There is a difficulty spike towards the end, I'd say, but I think it's fairly manageable. It feels like not all damage in the game is perfectly avoidable, although I'm sure it is. I've not watched any of like the insane like soul level 1 no damage speed runs and stuff. I'm sure people have done it, and people have done it with like a Guitar Hero controller by now and all that stuff. So I'm sure people can do it, but I find that some of the stuff in the end game is a bit inconsistent for me, at least. Still, but I need to play through the game a few more times probably to get a good bearing on that kind of stuff. But I really enjoyed my time with it, and I'll probably play it again at some point. But I need a break from it now, I think, because it's a game that I've just been like thinking about and playing for so long that, even after finishing it at around 120 hours, I went back and did a partial second playthrough, and then also watched a lot of streamers and YouTubers play it as well. And sort of, it was fun to look at how they approach the game differently because it's so open, and how they struggled at different points and it got to different areas at different levels. But then you see so much of the game and you've experienced so much of the game that I'm just like, I need to be away from it now. So it's been a few weeks since I've really sort of been deep into it. But when I was in it, I was super deep into it. It was great. And they've been the other thing that's come out about that game is they've been doing a lot of balance patches for it. I noticed, I mean, the game sold exceptionally well. I think like 13 million copies in a couple of weeks or something. So it's like by far From Software's most successful game. And I've noticed they've been doing a lot of different balance patches and changing things, changing how things work, which I'm not really used to seeing. I feel like the patches were quite minimal for the other games where it kind of just came out and then that was it, and then it never really changed. So I'm interested to see how that makes things different, if it would sort of break my playthrough or if it would make some things easier. I think I was using strength weapons and I think they've buffed them, so might make things easier. I remember when I played, I wanted to get sort of a balanced build in terms of I didn't want to use anything too cheap because I enjoy the combat and the struggle of these games. And I just like playing it in kind of a simple, I don't know, a way where I learn the patterns and I feel like I'm sort of developing as a player more than developing as a character a lot of the time. And that's just a personal preference thing. I think however you want to get through these games, however you want to play them, that's totally fine. Do whatever, suits you. And yeah, it was a really fun experience to just read everyone's thoughts about the game and play along with them and watch the coverage of the game and the reception and all of that kind of thing. So I'm excited for what From Software is going to do next as well. And then after Elden Ring, I didn't beat, I played Tunic. I still need to go back to it. Tunic was basically, it came out pretty quickly after I was done with Elden Ring, and I went straight into it. And so Tunic is, I think it's an Xbox timed exclusive. It's also on PC. It's kind of like a Zelda-like game where you play as a cute fox and you've got a sword and shield and bombs and a grapple shot and all the classic Zelda stuff. And it's got a really great charm to it, and a lot of personality in terms of the environments. And you collect these pages to fill up like old school video game instruction manual, and a lot of the world and a lot of like the language you can't read and you kind of don't know what's going on, so you have to sort of piece it together through context and slowly learning. And even sort of basic mechanics only become known to you, or known how to interact with them later in the game, which is really cool. It makes it feel like it's got this really deep layered world. I know Sean was playing it the last time an episode went up, and he was loving the game as well. I think he'd completed it. And yeah, it's great. But I noticed, so the aesthetic of the game is really like cute and sort of, I don't know, it looks simplistic. It's an indie game. It looks like Zelda, and I don't find Zelda games particularly difficult, but the combat in Tunic is quite tough. It really demands a lot of attention and focus in some areas. There's a mode where you can just take no damage, but I like that for accessibility reasons, but I kind of hate it in the sense that it's like you have like a normal mode and then you have like a mode where you can't die or take damage, and it's kind of like maybe there should be an in between, because the normal mode feels super difficult, and then the no hit mode is obviously like, you just beat everything without any challenge. So when I went to it after Elden Ring, and the reason I haven't beaten it is because it felt too hardcore for me, I guess. Like I was, going through all this stuff, moving, starting a new career sort of path, and then I have like one super difficult game after another difficult game, and I was like, I can't deal with this right now. So that was kind of when I stopped, and not to blame the game. The game's wonderful. I really am enjoying it. It's just not what I was expecting, and I sort of rushed into it too quickly, I think. So I definitely need to go back to it, but I'd highly recommend it. I think it's so charming and really fun, and it has like a great sense of mystery and a brilliant atmosphere around it.
Yeah, and you mentioned something really interesting that just like popped into my head, which is like situational entertainment, which sometimes, you can be going through something hard in your life and it's like maybe a movie or a TV show and it just doesn't hit, but then you can return to it later and like it hits hard. And it's just interesting that you went from like a hard game into another hard game, and the situation of moving and all of that, like just stacked on top. I just found that like that's really interesting that happened, especially with a game that's so cutesy like that one. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. It's just interesting that they didn't even have a lower difficulty mode that's not invincibility. I
Yeah, if
can't believe they didn't
people
have that.
if people have played the game, they'll know some of the boss fights in particular are really quite difficult. And yeah, it was just something where I think I just wanted like a change of pace, and I thought it was going to be more of a change of pace than it actually was. And because of course, Tunic isn't really like Elden Ring, like they're not that similar. But it was something where, yeah, I was expecting it to be sort of more casual and something that I could get into that way. And yeah, it's like you said about like timing with everything. It's not something negative about the game. It's just something that came from my experience with it, because it's kind of like I feel the same way about if I do like a big open world game or like a Ubisoft type game or something. If I do that, I don't want my next game to be like the same thing. Like I think I'd be driven insane. Like if I tried to play through an 100% every Assassin's Creed game in a row, like one after the other, I think I'd lose my mind. I think I'd quit gaming forever, maybe. And I think even when like that series has ups and downs in terms of quality, I feel like even when I went from like a worse one to a better one, I'd probably still hate the next one even more, just because of doing it like over and over again, and doing like similar things over and over again. It's nice to sort of break up the pacing and to experience stuff from different genres and different gameplay styles and thematic styles and everything,
I
rather
think
than the
that
same thing over and over, I think. So, and again, those games aren't that similar. That's just like an example, like an even more extreme example of what I'm talking about, I guess.
right. And like I went from Horizon, I did an intermediate game with Persona 5 Strikers, and then I went to Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm like, I think that Persona 5 Strikers actually boosted the way that I'm feeling about Cyberpunk, because if I went from an open world game to an open world game, it would have been quite draining. I feel like I would have been like, I don't want to do this stuff again. Like I just completed a different world, and now I'm going around to objectives on the map and completing this world, and it's like it doesn't feel that way right now, but that's maybe just because I had an intermediate game, and
Yeah,
now I'm gonna have to think about that between completions. Like that's actually like a really good point.
yeah. I think that can be the case even with release timings as well, right? In terms of like letting people miss a franchise, or letting people miss entries in a series or whatever, to sort of, or yearly installments of a series, to then get that sort of passion back towards them. Because I know people, what will happen is like with Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty or whatever, is people miss out like 1 year and then they might never come back because they feel like they're too far behind, and it's like you have to constantly keep up with this thing, and then but you get tired of it if you're sort of bombarded and like over stimulated with all of it. It's too much sometimes. So I think it can work better for smaller games as well. Typically, like there's some game series where I can definitely go from one to the other quite quickly, and usually for me it's if it's not as much of a time commitment. But that's why I've been spreading out the Yakuza games as well. Like it's going to take me forever to get through all of those because again, there's no way I could do them back to back. But then, so from Tunic, kind of big gap then in terms of the timeline of like what I've been playing. But then these past couple of weeks, I got into some multiplayer gaming. So I picked up and with a few friends picked up Trivial Pursuit Live 2. I was a fan of there's a Trivial Pursuit game on like Xbox, PS4, and I was a big fan of it, even though it kind of like it's not great. Like obviously, it's not going to win like any Game of the Year awards or anything because it's like it's just a trivia game. It's just you answer questions and there's some different ways of framing the way you answer questions, but you're essentially just picking the right answer to questions, and maybe there's 5 right answers in 40 wrong answers or something, or maybe there's 4 options and one of them's right, or maybe half the answers are right, or maybe sometimes you take it in turns, maybe you guess at the same time. It's kind of just really basic gameplay mechanics in terms of answering trivia questions, but it's a good time to sort of have a few friends in like an Xbox party or a PlayStation chat or whatever, and just talk about stuff and answer questions. And the questions are good as well in terms of bringing up topics of conversation if you think about it, because you're answering like a history question, and then one of you might be able to give more context about it, or it might remind you of some funny story or something. There's a lot to take out of the game, sort of adding to the social experience behind it. And I've always been a fan of the trivia stuff. Like I've watched like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and stuff like that, and I was back during my undergraduate, I was part of a pub quiz society, and that was really fun to experience that. So it kind of gave me a lot of good memories of my past, and it's great. It's really easy as well to like just message people and be like, "Hey, you want to go on this?" and then play like a couple of rounds for like an hour and a half, and then go off and do whatever else. And it's good because there's no a problem with multiplayer games is kind of like, I mean, if we imagine like Halo, for example, right? If you wanted to play Halo with me and I'd been playing it for like weeks on end, and then I play it with like another 2 guys who like always play it with me, and then we invite you, it's going to be kind of awkward to some extent because you've not got that like history with it and you've not like played a bunch, and then the matchmaking is skill based, so it's going to sort of push it towards it's not going to know what to do in terms of like less experience versus more experience, who's it going to put us against, that kind of thing. You might not know the maps, and we do, and it kind of has all this like extra baggage associated with it, anything that's sort of more complicated. And it's the same for like Rainbow Six Siege, which I don't play, but I know some friends of mine play a lot, so it would be sort of awkward the other way around if I joined that. And it's not like a barrier that's impossible to overcome, but it's nice to play a multiplayer game like Trivial Pursuit where it's like you just pick the right answer to the questions, right? Like I could have played 200 hours and you could play hour 1, and it's going to be like the same experience basically. It's not going to feel like anyone missed out or that you're not done enough, and it means that you can rotate people in and out of the game really easily, which is nice. It makes it sort of ultimate kind of casual party game type thing, and I like that sometimes. I always like the Mario Party games, well, the old ones anyway. The new ones kind of, I don't know, drop the ball, but the old ones were classics, and it brings back so many good memories, and it's so great to just play with people and talk about random nonsense while answering trivia questions.
And yeah, you're talking about this and it's really interesting. I actually haven't talked to one of my best friends in quite a long time. Our lives have kind of gone in different directions, and they just happened to like meet up in these past couple of weeks, and just the conversations that we have missed and that are all coming back at once. Like they live up in those great party moments, you know. And we were laughing so hard we were crying, and it was like it's such a special experience. And then my roommate and his girlfriend are playing through It Takes Two right now, and like they're going through co-op games, and it feels like I feel like co-op games are definitely the like pinnacle of multiplayer, because when you jump into something like that, it's like you're on the same level. When you go into multiplayer games, it's just like you said, there's just like so many variables of like it's good for when you're in high school or something, but like someone doesn't have the time, everybody else is playing more, learning the maps. It's like trying to line up schedules. It's a lot, and it's just like a co-op game is like boom, you jump in, boom, you're all at the same place. You're like right there, and it's just such an interesting idea. And I didn't even think about like a Trivial Pursuit. Like that's a genius game to play with friends, and especially in a party, because it's just like one of those things where you can just shoot the shit and like chat with each other and still have fun and like engage your brain in a game. It's really cool that you did that, really, honestly.
Yeah, it's great. You learn some stuff as well, and it's always good because you like get questions. Like if I've played with a bunch of like American friends, and there's some like American focused stuff, some more European focused stuff, and you sort of talk about that as well. And it's also got a very easy achievement list and trophy list. So if people are interested in that, the game gives you gamer score very, very quickly. There's not many achievements, and most of them are sort of like 100 gamer score or like 50 gamer score, like big gamer score numbers. And most of them are super easy, but I think the last and hardest achievement is you have to beat a full game without ever getting a question wrong, which does sound kind of tricky, but I'm pretty sure you can probably, when you're like getting that as the last achievement and you're done with the game, there's probably someone will have typed up a document somewhere that has every answer to every single question. And I guess if you can control F fast enough, you'd be able to just sort of cheat that way and get the achievement. Or you could play the game for long enough where that you know all the questions from, the fact that there's only a limited number and they repeat. I know with the last couple of sessions I've had with some friends, there's been questions where we've seen them before. So that's already starting to happen for me. So it doesn't seem like it's impossible in terms of it going from like super easy to like super difficult. But if you want to do it legitimately, and like right now, I'm not in a rush to get it because I don't want to, I don't want to look at something that has all the answers because it kind of ruins all the fun. It's kind of a good achievement to save for when like you're completely done with the game and you just want to, clear it, and that's it. So that achievement's kind of annoying, but then all the others are super easy. So if people do want the game as just like an achievement game as well, it's good for that in terms of you can probably get it all done in, I don't know, maybe 10 hours if you were really just going for all the achievements.
Which one is this again? There's like a couple of them.
Yeah, it's Trivial Pursuit Live 2.
Okay, I was just looking at the lists, and I was just curious because you talked about being 100 gamer score on each of them, and it's like, yeah, majority of those are bronze on PlayStation. So
that sucks. Yeah, I'll have a look one sec. Yeah, there's like 120 gamer score, unlock 30 titles. Yeah, there's 50 gamer score for answering 30 questions correctly in each category. 50 gamer score for 100 questions, 100 gamer score for 4 answers correct in a single grab bag, 120 gamer score for winning 30 game shows, 200 gamer score for the answer every question correctly won. So yeah, there's only 15 achievements on Xbox, and I've got 12 of them right now, and I've got 12 of them in about 8 hours without going for them, just playing it for like with friends casually, like not aiming to get them, and I've got 12 out of 15 in 9 hours. So it is a pretty quick completion, I think, except for maybe the win 30 game shows. That might take a while, but the AI is really bad in this game, so if you just play against AI over and over, you can probably get it that way. If you play against real players who are not completely stupid, then it'll take you a long time or a longer time. But your mileage will vary on that. I think I bet as well there's probably no one playing this game online, like in the random matchmaking. And if there is anyone playing it, I guarantee they'll just like get every question right immediately, because that was the situation with the first game, the Trivial Pursuit Live 1, where like a couple of months after release, if you'd ever try and get into a game with like random people, you just get a guy who instantly selects the right answer every single time because they've just played the game enough to get through every question. And then I don't know why they keep playing it, because like if you already know the answer to everything, then that's kind of taken all the fun out of the whole game. But yeah, it's an easy completion. I recommend it if you've got friends to play it with. But I mean, it's it's you're not gonna need a recommendation or a non-recommendation on a trivia game. Like, if it's for you. But I will say this one is pretty good compared to what's out there, because there's a lot of different trivia games out there, and some of them are like really terrible in terms of like either you have to like type in stuff and it's really slow, or the questions are just like written terribly. It's a pretty low bar, but this game, the questions are good, they're interesting. The game takes way too long to load for some reason. That's probably the biggest negative. When you go in through like the main menu, you press like A to start, and it's kind of like I joke that it's like the GTA 5 like going into like multiplayer loading screen or whatever, where it takes like 2.5 minutes for some, or like Red Dead Redemption 2 or something. Like, it's so weird to play it on a Series X, and it's just like the game's basically not too far off from being a browser game, essentially, where you just click boxes, and yet when you try and load it up, it takes like 40 seconds on this super fast SSD, and it's like a 1080p. I mean, I assume, I don't know how many frames it has, but it doesn't need more than probably 20. But yeah, so it's a good game, but it's not it's not going to blow you away. But I've been having a really fun time with it, for sure.
That's extremely fun. Yeah, it's definitely got me looking into it and being like, next time I'm in a party with my friends, maybe I'll suggest it. Like, honestly.
Yeah, and then the last game I've been playing this past week or so is Apex Legends. I kind of got back into it. I don't remember who it was. I think it was Shane, maybe, a friend of mine, suggested we play Apex Legends, and I did, and then I got like the addiction back at that point. Actually, I think I had two separate friends who I know from like completely independent of each other that wanted me to get back into it, and so I did, and then yeah, now I'm like kind of getting semi addicted. I mean, I don't think I've talked about it in the show, but for 2 years in a row, Apex Legends was my most played game, and I was pretty good at it as well. Not like, professional player level or anything like that, but kind of, I don't know, like I basically got to like the second highest rank when I played it seriously in terms of the like ranked matchmaking, and my win rate's quite high. My win rate's like 15%, and my KD's like 3.5 or something. So I was pretty good at it, and that always stopped me because I stopped playing it at some point, and then they added new characters and new maps and new guns and stuff, and then it's the thing I was talking about where it's like you don't play it and then you feel like you've been left behind, and you try and come back, and it's like even harder to get back into it because there's like this other factor of like I used to be really good at this game, and now I'm playing it, and like I used to know everything about it. I used to know the meta. I used to know the characters. I used to know all the weapons, and they've changed everything. So like, how am I going to get back into it? And so I never sort of broke through that barrier of getting back into it and committing enough time to it to sort of get back up to where I was before. And I'm still not back up to where I was before, but I feel like I've broken through the barrier in terms of like, I feel comfortable. I feel happy playing it. I've been having fun playing it with friends as well, which always helps make any game better. But it's been really enjoyable, and I still feel like the way it plays in terms of the movement especially, but also the combat, it's fantastic. I really love Titanfall and Titanfall 2, and this game uses basically all the same weapons as those games, only they're sort of scaled differently in terms of damage and stats and stuff. But I really loved those games, and it was sad to me when both Titanfall 1 and Titanfall 2 never really took off in terms of player base, and that was always sad to me. So Apex being super popular and getting like tons and tons of support, getting like really high player counts, it's really easy to find a game in it. It's great to see Respawn finally get like a huge success with that, and then on the single player side with Jedi Fallen Order as well. Like they've kind of nailed it recently with like two games that different types of gamers really, really like. So shout out to them being amazing. And also, Apex has been fun, but it's one of those games where it's like I already can tell I'm going to sink probably like another 50 hours into it, and which is bad because it doesn't have any achievements that I need to get. It's got quite an easy 1,000, actually, surprisingly, although it's probably harder now. Because the thing that's happened in that game as well, first of all, there's the skill based matchmaking, which is funny and annoys me in this game. It annoys me in basically every multiplayer shooter, but my unranked games are easier than my ranked games, which doesn't really make much sense. But it's because my unranked games seem to be using my stats, like my profile stats overall. Whereas because I've not played in the ranked leagues in ages, your rank decays. So if you haven't played, so when you end a season, I think next season you start like 2 ranks below where you were last time. And because I've missed like 4 or 5 seasons in a row or something, it means that my rank now is like, when I came back, was like the lowest of the low. It was like bronze 4 or something, or bronze 1. So that means that my ranked games are super easy, but my unranked games are really difficult because of the way the matchmaking works. So it's been easier to play ranked, which is really weird. But now I feel like I'm finally getting there, and again, that makes it more difficult to get back into these games, because if your profile's historic stats when you were sort of like at the peak and you played it like every day and you played it for hundreds and hundreds of hours recently, if you're going back into that environment after you've not played for so long and the game still thinks you're at that level, then you're just in for like a really bad time. So the first few games were really embarrassing, really terrible, because I couldn't aim anymore, I couldn't do anything, and it was putting me against people who were absolutely insane. And then eventually I went into ranked, and then it was a lot easier for a bit, and then now I feel like I'm kind of back where I'm comfortable. But the player base of this game is kind of insane now as well. Like when the game first came out, I was kind of having a really good time because the game shadow dropped. Like it was announced and then released on the same day, pretty much. Or it was announced and released in the same week. I don't know if it was exactly the same day, so maybe not technically a shadow drop, but it was basically announced with like no fanfare, and then it came out and it was like a huge thing all of a sudden. And it came out of nowhere and no one was expecting it. But back then, because I mentioned all the weapons are from Titanfall and the game kind of plays similarly to Titanfall, I was loving it because I'd played so much of Titanfall that when Apex comes out and a bunch of like the Fortnite kids, come to play Apex, they just get owned because they've never played Titanfall. So it was really great when it first came out because it was really easy and the player base wasn't very good. But now the player base, a lot of those players have been playing since the game came out, which is years ago now. I think maybe like 4 years ago or something. It's people are insane at this game because they've just played thousands of hours of it and never stopped playing it. And so if you come against those players, you just just give up. Like I feel bad for anyone. It's people say this about a lot of games, a lot of live service games, a lot of battle royales, a lot of shooters. I know people say it about Destiny as well, especially where it's like it's a game that I love, but it's like it's really hard to recommend to people who haven't played it because it's like the learning curve and like the wall that you've got to break through to sort of start enjoying it is going to be so big at this point because there's so many updates and so much that you've got to learn that it can be difficult to recommend to people because it's like if you didn't already get into it and put a sizable amount of hours into it, then it's going to be way harder to get into it now than it would have been back then. And I still think it's worth it because it's like it's one of the most rewarding and fun shooters I've ever played, but at the same time it's like for these types of games as well, these live service stuff, you can only really commit to one or two of them. You can't be playing all the sort of live service stuff. And so if you're already super into a bunch of other games, then there's no reason to go to this as well. So it's really hard to sort of sell people on it, or at least in good conscience for me to be like, yeah, you should totally drop everything and play it, because even though I think it's great, I understand that if you're already super into, I don't know, I was going to say Anthem, which I don't know why, because no one's into Anthem.
No.
If you're really into Marvel's Avengers or Sea of Thieves, then they also not great. Well, Sea of Thieves is okay, but if you're really into those, then obviously you're not gonna probably not gonna want to go into it. But it's good. I love it, and I'm worried that I'm just going to end up talking about Apex Legends for for a few weeks.
And that's totally fine. Play what you want to play. Um, is that all of your games?
Yeah, that's it.
All right. So I got two completions. It was Horizon Forbidden West. I finished that off, and then I went straight into Persona 5 Strikers because I had already started that. And my completion percentage had dropped because I had like 4 games active at one time, and they were all like really, really low on completion percentage. So I'm like, let's just get back and complete some of these games and just get them, out of the way. But it also was unintentionally a break between two open world games, which I'm chasing now, Cyberpunk 2077. I have 18 out of 45 trophies, which is 31%. And I have been loving this game. It got fixed. It got patched a month ago, and I kind of was in the middle of things, and I was like, you know what? I'll play it when I play it. And I was pretending I was like, oh, it never launched. It's like it just released now. I've been waiting for this release, and I've been saying that to my friends, and it is so good. Like there was a really good game there, and it needed more time to cook. And now that it's cooked, This is another game just like Horizon Forbidden West where I'm not fast traveling. I'm getting into a car and I'm driving around this city because this city is the most alive city I've ever seen in video games. Like this shit blows my mind. It's so awesome, and I'm finding more often now that I like riding motorcycles because in first person when I'm driving, and I mean you can switch it to third person, but that takes me so out of this because the world is just like I said. This one's alive, and so I just want to stay in first person and stay in that character always. And so when I get into a vehicle, when you're in like a car or a truck, there's like a overhead like cab part. And when you're in a motorcycle, there's not that. So you can like look up at the sky and like the skyline and see the tall ass buildings and like see all it's just a lot more open of a screen and less clutter. And so I tend to be riding the motorcycles around a lot more, and I love it. I love seeing this city. I love seeing the dirty parts and the high end parts, and I'm starting to learn the streets. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, I've got to get into Cyberpunk. Like, I think I'm still waiting for it, but because they're doing like I kind of want to wait for all the expansion runs to be out, which is going to take ages. But I'm just like I want like the definitive experience because it was released so so fucked up.
Right. And honestly, it still has like minor bugs. I've had to reload a save a couple times because there's points at which, and I think I described this to you when we lost the episode, but just for the listeners, I'm going to talk about it. But there's like a little bit of a bug where the characters in the game will glow. It looks like Borderlands style where it would be like an outline that's black, but not black. It's white. And so it looks like they're glowing, and I'm like, oh, I don't like that. So you just reload the save, lighting gets fixed, and it's something that you wouldn't notice if the graphics weren't so good and the lighting wasn't so good. So it's just like one of those things where it's like, oh, the lighting's so good, I'm noticing that character's glowing. Reload the save, that bug's gone. And I haven't had anything where like cars are popping in, NPCs are not loading. I'm not seeing textures not there. Everything is working fine. There's no major bugs that I'm seeing that like break the game. And so when they said they fixed it, I wholeheartedly am there. And also I have to say, the haptics on the controller or the adaptive triggers feel so cool. They feel so cool when I'm driving like a motorcycle. And it's just like, I can feel when the gears shift on the trigger. And then on top of that, like say I hit a curb or something, or I'm like slowing down, I can just feel it. Like, especially when I'm riding a motorcycle on the left and the right trigger, like I can feel the left, which is like the front tire, hit the curb before the right trigger. So I can feel before the back one hits the curb. So I'll feel like bump on the triggers. It's just like, it's really, really cool. And that's something that wasn't there at the launch of the game. They had so much that they needed to fix. And you were talking about expansions specifically, which comes out in 2023, supposedly, unless it gets delayed. But this makes me excited for that because I'm going to be able to finish this game, and then I'll let it have like a down period, and then I'll come back because this is a game that I want to come back to. Already, I can tell because I've been doing the side stuff. I'm going around the world. I'm really having a great time, and it's just like another one of these worlds where I love the side quests. I love everything about exploring this world. And I just again, like I said, there's so many things in this world where you see a mission marker and it doesn't tell you what it is. It's like, but you can go and explore it and it's like, boom, then it takes you on this huge quest. And it's like, you don't, people are totally going to miss this stuff. I did like this murder mystery quest and it like with kidnappings and like serial murder, like serial killers. And I'm like, this is in a cyberpunk world, it is so cool. And there's like so many different like criminal elements to this game that don't like exist. I mean, they do exist in our reality, like in like organ transplants and stuff. It's like, or organ harvesting and things like that. But it's instead of that being how it is, it's like the cyber components are being harvested out of people. And it's like, oh, it's such a deep and cool world. And like, I'm constantly like on edge. And that's actually something with the quest structure that I like is it feels urgent. You know how like sometimes in games you'll be like, oh, it's the end of the world is happening and I'm dilly-dallying over here doing some bullshit. This one, I feel like things are so heavy and dire that I'm like constantly sticking to one storyline because I'm like, if I don't do this, what happens if it fails? And like there are actual fail states for these missions. If someone asks to meet you in the evening and like it's an urgent thing, it's like, don't miss that evening meeting. And you can be like, oh, that's stressful for the game, but it's also like, or just, you know, listen to the quest giver and do what they're telling you to do. It's like it's not hard. And I find that not stressful, but really, really immersive. And so I'm just like really, really into this game and I can't wait to play more. I'm going to try to play more tonight, but I got a lot to do. And that's all I've been playing really. I was going to ask you about this because I won't be gaming very much, but how do you feel about sneaking games in to hit milestones? Because I think I'm going to throw in SpongeBob. It's the rehydrated. I'm going to play all the way through Cyberpunk. I won't mess with my immersion or anything, but there's some very grindy stuff at the end of the game where you're like, it's like an Ubisoft game, like just straight up. There's no way else to describe it, where you have to complete each section of the map. Like there's different sections of the city and it's like, you got to complete everything there and everything there. And so I'm like, whenever I'm grinding that and I get to like a closer end, I'm just going to switch over to SpongeBob, get the 224th completion of mine so that I can make Cyberpunk the 225th.
Well, I mean, I wholeheartedly recommend specifically that SpongeBob game, definitely, because that game's great. It's a really easy completion and it's fantastic. I really like it. It was weird because that game got like the remaster got pretty good reviews and then GameSpot gave it like a 2 out of 10, which was just like mind-boggling. And that was a really funny part where the reviewer struggled with this easy like bowling minigame part thing, like this like really simple puzzle. And it was, I mean, it's fine, right?
That's
like
how it goes.
I'm glad people are honest about their opinions and their experience, but to me it was just totally different to my experience in terms of I played the game as when I was a child on the PS2 and I thought the remaster was great. I think it retained like everything from the original basically, so if you didn't like the original you won't like this one, but I thought it was a fantastic game back when I played it and I still think it's great. I still think it really held up well and it's very easy in terms of platformers, but not to the point where it's boring. I think it sort of is versatile enough in terms of what you have to do for the golden spatulas, which are kind of like the stars if you imagine like a Mario type game. What you have to do in the levels is varied enough and the level designs are varied enough and the areas are different enough from each other that it keeps it interesting the whole way, and it's kind of like quite a tight experience in that it's not ridiculously long. And there's a lot of Easter eggs and jokes based on the show, which I used to watch the show growing up and loved the show. So it was a really nice completion when I got it. I really enjoyed it. So I think it's a great choice because it's not going to give you much difficulty to get the completion and it's going to be quite quick. And it's also great in its own right, as it like you should have a fun time playing it. And in terms of Cyberpunk, when I said about the expansions, for me as well, I didn't make it sort of explicit in talking about it, but I find it really tough to go back to games for DLC and expansions a lot of the time. Like, it's always difficult. Even if I really love the game, I find it quite tough. So when I can, like now that I've already missed the launch hype of Cyberpunk, like I played it at launch very briefly, but I was like, nope, I need to put this down. I'm now like, now that I'm waiting already, and I know they just did like the next gen patch, so it's like another, a bunch of people are sort of getting back into it now, and it would be a good opportunity. I'm kind of like, I want to wait for everything to come out for it, so then I'm like, I've already missed the initial hype anyway. I may as well wait for the expansions because I probably won't play them otherwise if I play it now or if I play it in a few months. So I think I am gonna wait because of that as well. But it's great to hear that there's not really any major issues and that it's just kind of minor issues and that the tech stuff is pretty much sorted out now. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you mentioned how you find it hard to return to games after putting them down for expansions and stuff. And this is something that Sean and I talked about that I actually want to ask you about. But Sony's completions are getting a little bit easier as time goes on, and Horizons, Sean finished Horizon with the platinum at 70% in game, and then I finished it with 77% in game. And so the game was not over. I still had a lot left to do, and I actually was a little bit conflicted because I'm like, I actually hate that, but it makes me excited because if they release DLC, I will jump back into the game before the DLC releases and play more. Like, I will finish that like in-game completion, do some more side quests, I'll do some more challenges in the arenas, I'll get myself back into that game, and then when that DLC drops, it's like it's perfectly gonna flow into that expansion. And it makes me kind of excited. It's like I don't know if they planned it that way or like how the completion works, but it makes me excited specifically for that experience. And I don't mind going back to games. I don't ever lose my muscle memory with controls or anything like that. And there are some games that I love so much that I don't delete them off my console because I'm like, oh, I want to go back and play that. I did that with Deathloop for a little bit. Like, I kept Deathloop on my console because I'm like, what if I just want to jump in and play a level and do a loop like one time? And it's like, if there's a reason for me to go and play a game again and like get back into it, that makes me super excited. So it does make me excited to go back into Cyberpunk whenever in 2023. Will I keep it on my console the whole time? I actually don't know. But what are your thoughts on like a game not having the completion and like complete end game, but you still get the completion?
I think it's fine. It depends on the game, really. Like, there's definitely some where I wish. Yeah, I've seen it both ways. Where there's games where I get the completion before the 100%, and I'm kind of like, I kind of wish it was a bit more difficult. I kind of wish it made me do more to get it. And then there's other games where the completion could be quite easy, and 100%, it's like way before 100%, and I'm like, this game sucks. Like, I'm glad to be done. I delete it immediately. Like, as soon as the achievement pops, I'm like, I'm done about it. Like, even if I'm not like I don't remember a specific example, but I could definitely imagine a situation where, like, if the achievement pops before like the final cutscene, I might just close the game and be like, "Nah, I'm done." like if the game's that bad or that annoying, and I think specifically that is usually for like some like indie games that feel like they might be cool and then they're really not. The type like really bad games, like not like, oh, this is a 6 out of 10. Games that are like, oh, this is terrible. This is like a 2. Maybe like The Medium, for example, right? Like, shout out to The Medium. That game, which is like I gave it like a 4 or a 3, but that game is kind of like, if that game gives me the achievements before I'm done, then I'm just gonna quit and I'm done with that game. But then there's other games where I feel the opposite, and then there's some games where kind of maybe Yakuza and maybe like GTA, where you get like the keys to the city achievements for like doing everything. Like GTA 4, you have to like shoot all the pigeons or something, and GTA 5 you have to collect like all these stupid bags and go in a submarine and go underwater, and I'm kind of like, does this really have to be part of the completion? Like, it's just busy work. Or the Assassin's Creed stuff with like the flags or the feathers or whatever. The stuff I'm talking about, right? I'm kind of like, did you really have to make that an achievement? Couldn't you just make it like a costume or something? So it can go either way. It depends on on the game, I think. And
That's
in
a good
terms
take.
of going back to games as well, yeah, I just find it tough with DLC. I think because it's like it DLC always comes out at a weird time. I think it always comes out sort of like when you've put it down, but not long enough for when you want to come back to the game. At least for me, because there's games I want to pick up again and play a lot, and I don't feel like the muscle memory's lost. Although a lot of the time, I like to replay the game. Like I was thinking of replaying Mirror's Edge, for example, but if I did that, I'd probably start the game and just go the whole way through. So in big games, it's kind of annoying because that's not really easy to do. Big RPGs especially, and yeah, then it's not the muscle memory that I lose. It's more like I don't know, like what all my gear is, or like what I was doing when I stopped and that kind of thing. That can be more or like there's too many markers on my map and I don't know what half of them mean. That kind of stuff, I think, is probably more what annoys me rather than the muscle memory.
What about Burnout? I'm actually curious because this game is like 70 hours and then it's going to have expansion. And I mean, before the game launched, and you know how the marketing was, it was a big fat lie. And they said like they were working on an expansion that was bigger than the Blood and Wine expansion of Witcher 3, which is basically a whole nother Witcher game. It's like 30 hours. And
Yeah,
it's like if they do something like that makes this over 100 hours, are you going to burn out like during your completion run?
no, but I think I'd rather have like the expansion out so then I can make my own plans around it, if that makes sense. Whereas if it's not out, then I can't, right? Like I don't like if I start Cyberpunk today, I don't know how long it's going to take me to get the completion. Like I know how many hours it's going to take, but I don't know how I don't know how much I'm going to play it. Like I don't know how quickly I'm going to get through those hours. If that makes sense. I don't know if I'm going to play 4 hours tomorrow and then 2 hours the next day and that so in terms of that, then I don't know, like relatively, like when I'm going to be ready to come back to it, how I'm going to feel about it, that kind of thing. Whereas if I wait for the expansions to come out, it's like I can know and like make a judgment on the fly that way. That's kind of better than the whole not knowing and also it being kind of far out. And I feel like what happens more often than not is you finish it and then you kind of like I don't know. I feel like I can pace myself to usually get burned out like when I'm at the end of my playthrough. Like I feel like most games, if it's paced properly, it will feel like you're kind of done with it when you're done with it. And sometimes that can be a problem with expansions, but what the best expansions do, I think, is they feel different enough to the base game, either in terms of environment or narrative or gameplay. I feel like gameplay is the rarest one. Like usually it's narrative or environment where it's different, but usually they have like a big hook that is different enough from the base game where it doesn't just feel like more of the base game. It feels like something transformative or different. And I think if it doesn't feel that different, I'm kind of not interested in the expansion in the first place, because that's the other factor, right? Is that if the expansion comes out and everyone's like, "Oh, this sucks. This is the worst thing ever," then I'll just not buy it and just not play it. I'll just play the rest of the game. But it's good to have it out so that then you can either play around, plan around it, or
I I think I agree with you on the fact that like I don't know how I do it. I don't know if it's a completionist thing, but I don't burn out until like the end of my playthrough. And there's definitely games where it's like when you're doing the completion grind, you're like, I am ready for this game to be over. It's not necessarily that you didn't like it. It's just like you're hitting the edge of that. You're ready to move on and you just got to get through it. And so I totally get what you mean there and like pacing yourself. And for some reason, I just get so immersed in these games that I'm not ready to be done until it's over. And I really am grateful that I'm able to do that because I know that some people like start and they're like, I'm out like so quickly. They can't get into it or they're halfway through. Like my roommate, for example, was telling me about It Takes Two and he thinks it's too long. He's like, I'm dreading there's 3 more levels. I'm like, how are you dreading? Like I was like, did you enjoy it? And he's like, yeah, I'm really loving this game. And I'm like, then how are you dreading that like you're about to get more enjoyment out of it? I'm like, you're gonna play a different game and you're gonna wish there's more co-op games. And I'm like, but there's like a part of your brain that's telling you like you're gonna think back and be like, I wish I had more time with that game. And it's just I just don't understand it. And that's totally fine. That's everybody's different perspective. But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I didn't ever think about pacing myself through these games, especially long ones, really long ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think because again, it depends on what the expansion is, but the great thing about a lot of expansions is they feel sort of different enough and standalone enough that you can kind of decide at that point, like, okay, I'm going to take a break, or I'm going to carry on, or I'm going to just sort of check it out and see what is sort of the big hook, what is the big difference about it. You know, does it add this new gameplay element? Is it on this separate island that, you know, has a different person ruling over it, or whatever, you know, that kind of idea. And then you can decide from there if that's sort of what you want to do. But I'd rather sort of do that when it's all there, you know, all there in front of me, so I can kind of binge it and just like go like get fully immersed and like do everything all in a row if I love it that much, or you know, take a break and pace myself sort of more slowly through it.
That's so interesting that you say that, because I actually have no idea where the Cyberpunk expansion will be or where it's going to go. I know that the game has 4 endings. I don't know anything about them, and it makes me curious. Is like, where are they gonna, what are they gonna do with this DLC with the 4 different endings? You know, like, I don't know. I can't even imagine because I don't know the endings, but it's one of those things where it's like, is it a different character? Because then they don't have to tie themselves to these 4 different situations. I don't know. I actually have no clue, but it makes me excited for that and like what they're gonna do. But yeah, you're right. I think it is a situational DLC, because there are some that are like completely new games, and then there's some that are just like tacked on to the city, and it's like, just do more Ubisoft collectathons here with a new little whatever thing to
Yeah,
do.
yeah. The worst for me is definitely when it's like the exact same types of quest, but with like a slightly different coat of paint. Like that's
Yeah.
the, you know, I've played good DLC and bad DLC, and that's probably the bad DLC. But usually there's, you know, and then it becomes like a catch-22, right? Because then I'd be more worried about burnout because it's, you know, more of the same. But then also I'm probably less likely to even touch the expansion, because why would I want to, you know, why would I want to pay more money for that? You know, like
I know what you mean. And, you know, over time, I'm getting better at this, but there was a short period where I'm like, oh man, that game has DLC, and my completion percentage is like 60% on that game. I could totally go and get those trophies. And it's like, look up the reviews for those DLCs. Don't just do them for trophies. Like, seriously, gotta stop wasting time on that. And so I've gotten better about that. Are you ready to move to the topic on the table?
yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about completion percentage. Mine has gone up to 82.21%. It feels good because I went through all of February and all of March without a completion. And then in April, I'm finally like back in the groove of like getting completions. I was just playing way too long of games. You know, Stardew was really long, and Tales of Arise is really long, Horizon's really long, and now Cyberpunk is really long. I don't know when I'm going to get out of this groove of really, really long games that are, you know, 60, 70 hours long, but it feels good to be completing games again. I don't know. There's like something in me that needed that, that needed that completion.
Yeah. So your percentage is much higher than mine in terms of at least what I've got on true achievements. In terms of, I've talked about before how when I got my 360, I wasn't immediately into achievements, and I just played tons of games, like played them for like, you know, 10 minutes or whatever, and never sort of completed them. And also a lot of them were quite bad or had like really terrible achievement lists. You know, I'm talking like, especially early 360 days where people didn't know what they were doing. I mean, I played Condemned and finally got the completion in that, but that game has like 980 points for some reason and not the full 1,000. And then, you know, there's a bunch of like Guitar Hero games where I'm like nowhere near good enough and never will be good enough to get all the achievements. And also, I don't even know where my peripherals are for them and stuff. Like, there's stuff that I can't basically go back to very easily. Like, maybe one day, but you know, and stuff like Perfect Dark Zero. And even Condemned 2, it has like a bunch of multiplayer achievements that like I got my first achievement in Condemned 2 in like 2008, and I only recently, as listeners of the show will know, completed Condemned and Condemned 2 like fully in terms of the actual campaign on the hardest difficulty and all that kind of thing. But even in that game, Condemned 2, after coming back to it, I'm only at like 400 and something points, I think. But I thought it would be interesting to add to it, so my completion percentage 66.44%. But then if I go and filter by, so first of all, I'll filter by Xbox Series X and S exclusives, my completion percentage becomes 70.34%. Then if I go by Xbox One, my percentage is 76%. But then if I go to Xbox 360, it's 54%. So, like I was saying, you can clearly see like it's from the 360 days where I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I was playing, and that percentage not great. But then the Xbox One and the Series are sort of low to mid 70s right now. So I'm happy with where they're at. Not happy with the 360 stuff, but it's fine in terms of the percentage. I think it's still relatively high considering I play a lot of games. I try to play a lot of games, and I like to. I don't want to be. We've talked about it before, but you can get into kind of like a toxic, maybe toxic, maybe that's too strong a word, but I'd say negative headspace in terms of denying yourself the opportunity to have great experiences and play great games because you're so sort of obsessed with the percentage that you won't play something that you don't think you can get the completion in. And I think that's kind of, it's probably, at least for me, taking it a step too far. If I had infinite money, maybe I'd have like a separate account and buy games on that and play it that way or whatever. Like I know some people do that and that's a good alternative, but I feel like that's too much hassle and annoying to not have the games that you want to own and that you're proud of on your main account. So I try to be a bit selective with what I play because I want, first of all, I want to play something that I'll enjoy, and secondly, because I will want to consider the completion. But I think that enjoyment factor and that sort of, I'm interested in this, so I'll play it, that should always take priority, at least for me. And, or playing something with friends or something like that. Like, I wouldn't want to deprive myself and be like, no, I can't play this because I'll never complete it. Like, I wouldn't want to get it that far. But I also want to play games that are easier to complete and also games that are really fun to complete as well. So for me, it's a balance in that sense. So I think the completion percentage stuff is interesting, but not something to get super obsessed over. Otherwise, you'll just have a worse time and you'll probably not experience as many great games.
I was obsessed with it for a while. I was really, really obsessed with my completion percentage. It was right. I think in the beginning of the PS4 generation, I started to understand trophies a lot more. And I was in that situation where I'm like, I'm not going to play this game if I can't complete it. And I still kind of have that, but not near as heavy. And like you said, I actually do have a multiplayer account. I do not play multiplayer games on my main account. I just don't like them to affect my completion percentage because I know in my heart I'm never ever going to complete that. So I'm like, why would I buy it on this account and why would I play it on this account? It's just, it doesn't make sense. This is a single player account for me.
Yeah, I think however you can rationalize it or get around it is good, but I do think it is, it is important to get around it. I think I'd recommend to anyone, listening that's super into achievement hunting or trophy hunting to find a way to let yourself play stuff that you really want to play and don't let this kind of thing like severely hold you back. Even if it's, sometimes I felt like when I was sort of more conscious of it, like I guess, sort of have an idea of like a cheat game almost, like, oh, I'll play this, but then afterwards I'm going to play these two games that are super quick completions or whatever. Have something, have a plan around it so that you can make yourself feel better afterwards to kind of be like, oh, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this afterwards, and I'm going to complete all of those. So, it'll be okay. This game could be like a cheat game or whatever. If you need to do something like that, I think it's, worth framing it in a way that can, make yourself happy to give different things a try.
I totally agree. And, it was kind of cool that we both had that situation where when we started in the PS3 360 generation, that I actually started off hunting really hard because I didn't have any other games. And so it was like, how can I play this game longer? I'm just a teenager. Like, what can I do? And so, I completed Uncharted Drake's Fortune, Lord of the Rings, Aragorn's Quest. And let me tell you, that game, not good. Infamous, and then Batman Arkham Asylum, like all four of these were completed in a row. And then I hit Rock Band, and that's like low percentage completion. And then I was like, oh, I love this Borderlands game. I'm going to try to complete it. And I got the platinum, but it's not like 100%. And then a lot of games where I just dipped my toes in, and the games that I loved, I completed, and the games I didn't. And it left a lot of games on my list where they're under 5% or whatever. And it's like, that was just me trying different games, and that's totally fine. And I always check the completion before I go into a game, but I don't think in recent memory I have looked at a game and been like, oh, I want to play that so bad. Oh, I can't complete it. I'm not going to play it. Never do that anymore. Like, that was a thing that I did early PS4, which again, I was younger, I'm like 20 years old or something like that, or 18 to 20. And now I'm like, if I want to play this game, I'm going to play it. It's a matter of when it goes on sale or something like that. And I'll try to get as much completion. There's definitely been games where I'm like, I can't get the completion, but I'm going to go as hard as I can on that game
Yeah.
until I can't anymore.
Yeah, for me with Condemned 2, it was like I'll do all the single player stuff. I'll do every single, single player thing in the game, and that will be like my completion, right? Because Condemned 1 was only single player stuff, and the only thing people care about in these games is the single player. So it's like I'm not going to do all the other stuff, but I'll just do the single player stuff, and then I'll be happy and feel satisfied. And then while you were talking, I was thinking another, sort of, I guess, healthy way to look at it, if you are, like us and super, competitive and interested in completing games, maybe look at it in terms of taking it as a challenge. If you see the list and you think, oh, that's going to be a nightmare, maybe you can sort of spin it in a way of like, okay, I'll give it a try, and then, maybe I'll go for it, maybe I'll push myself, maybe I'll sort of chip away at it a little bit at a time and sort of get some energy from that, even if immediately you're sort of turned away from it. Try to sort of see it as a challenge or an opportunity. I played a good example of this. I've played Wolfenstein 2, right? And that has the Mein Leben nightmare achievement. I don't have that achievement, but I'm like, one day I might get it. Like maybe I'll go for it, and see it that way. See it in that kind of like, well, I've started it, so now I've got the opportunity to get it, right? Like it kind of gets you one step closer to it than if you'd never played it at all. So, those are ways that I think you can sort of try to look at it and be more, I don't know, healthy about it and less sort of obsessive and yeah, awkward.
For sure. And, there's been games, I've said it just a moment ago, it's like, there's just games that I'm not completing just right now because I just can't. And I'm not going to drag myself through the mud for hours for one trophy. Like I have a limit and I can't do that. I would rather play different games, but I do love my completion percentage. It's something that I found out, through the website, and I'm like, this is really fun to watch go up. It is fun to watch go up, and I'm not obsessed with it like I was. Oh my God, I was obsessed. Dude, I started at 53%, and I just looked at it and I was like, I'm going to go play games that are on my list that I can get higher. And that's when, like, the beginning of the PS4 generation, and I just started hitting them over and over. And I would play new games. I wouldn't just stay on my list. But I'm part of a Discord, like a trophy hunting Discord, and there are people who constantly encourage me to go back. They'll look at my list and they'll be like, this game you can go do. This game you can go do on PS3. This game you can do on PS3. It's like, that's fun, but I have a list of games that I want to play, and I'm going to do those before I ever go back. Like, there's games, for example, one game that I do want to go back to and complete is Ni no Kuni 1, the original. It is a game, it's maybe my favorite JRPG, and I don't have the completion in it, and I know it's going to take a long time and a huge grind, and so I'm just like, I'll go do that when I want to, like that's a game that I'm going to love when I go back and play it, so I'll just do it when I want to. And like that's kind of how we go, about these completions. And I'm hearing there's some problems with Cyberpunk completion, but I don't know. I don't think there's any problems currently ever since the most recent patch. So I'm gonna go for it, and if I miss something or something's up, then I'll just tell people, watch out for that. Like, it's not as heavy as it used to be on me. But yeah,
that's good. That's great.
Do you have a trophy and achievement of the week?
Yeah, so mine's from Tunic. It's called Bring It to the Wrong Fight, and it's so you get the sword pretty early on in Tunic, and you basically need it, or you think that you need it, to break through these bushes that are everywhere on the map that you can't really walk through. So it's kind of like one of those things where it's meant to sort of gate your progress and kind of meant to railroad you into getting the sword. But the achievement is to not get the sword and to get the gun before you get the sword. And so the gun is in like a later game area that you're not meant to go to immediately. You have to go through like this frog palace to get to a hook shot, and then you can use the hook shot to basically like pull a guy off the ledge, and then you can use that to kind of get to the area with the gun. And it's like this whole thing, but you can actually do it within 10 minutes of starting the game, which I should actually watch if there's any Tunic speedruns, because it seems like a cool game where you can sequence break and do things in weird order like that. And I think it's cool that they thought of that. They thought of like, oh, what if someone like gets the stick and they use that as their main weapon until they can get the gun before the sword? It's kind of cool that they planned around that and that they reward it with an achievement. And also for this, I did the capture for a guide on Macca's channel. So, because I looked at the list when I played Tunic, and that achievement really stood out to me and was something where I was like, I wanna do this, and I want to be, one of the first people to sort of mess around and figure out how to do it. So I recorded a guide for it, and it was really great to get that up on Macca's channel. And I think it's fairly easy. You can do it on the mode where you can't die, because I think it's more interesting in a navigational sense than a enemy fighting or kiting sense, because you really don't want to fight like the enemies with a stick. You just want to run past them. So my route can probably be done if you have damage on, although it'd require some more, pacing around and sort of baiting enemies backwards and forwards a bit more. But I'd recommend doing it where you can't get hit, because it's more fun to sort of go around the different areas in a different order and figure out how to sort of navigate through the environments at an early sort of place in terms of your equipment than it is to deal with the enemy stuff. The enemy stuff's really annoying. But it's a really fun achievement, and I really enjoyed it. And I love when developers are super creative about sequence breaking their own games, because as well, I imagine some developers can be, well, I normally don't hear that actually. Developers are pretty cool with people breaking their games and going in different ways to the intended order. But I assume, some people aren't going to encourage people to figure out how to sequence break their games. So it's cool to see them reward it and want people looking for that kind of thing and really interested in how the community takes the game and does lots of different things with it.
Yeah, that is really cool and creative. Honestly, that feels like they put love into that list, because, you have to do something so different, and it's something that they thought about, and they were like, hey, maybe we can teach the players to sequence break. Like, maybe there's players who've never done that before, and that's really cool.
Yeah, it's good in terms of an extra challenge for yourself as well, in terms of just, you're not going to do it by accident. So it's something where you see it and then you're like, oh, how do I do that? And you kind of map it out in your head. Like when you've played enough of the game, you kind of like, oh, I know this area and I know this area. And to get to this area where the thing is, I need to have this other thing, but I can't get there because of, XYZ and so on. And you sort of play it out in your head and then figure out a way to sort of get past everything. I think that's, it makes the game kind of more of a puzzle, which is, I mean, it's basically like having another partial playthrough of the game in like a fun, challenging way, and it doesn't take too long. It only takes about 10 minutes, so it's kind of nice in terms of how time consuming it is as well, and it's not super finicky or difficult to do, but it's just an interesting challenge.
Absolutely. My achievement is from, or trophy and achievement, is from Cyberpunk, and I wasn't going to choose Cyberpunk. I actually was about to go back to the main page on PSN profiles and then like start looking at the new games and like new lists that came out just to try to grab something. But the most recent trophy that I got was called Must Be the Rats. And this is a common joke with me and my friends, and it goes back to the PS3, Xbox 360 generation. It still happens today, but it's gotten much better. But it's perform a distraction of enemies with like a quick hack 30 times without drawing attention to yourself. And the trophy is not hard. It's just one of those things where I laughed because there's so many games during the PS3 360 generation where you'd kill someone and their body would be laying on the ground and an enemy would be like, walk over It's like, must be the wind or must be the rats. And then they walk away. It's like, dude, there's a dead body at your feet. Like, what are you talking about? And it's like one of those things that they're like, we're just going to throw that little trophy in there. It must be the rats. And basically I had a situation where there was 2 quick hack items, and I would make the enemy go to one, and then I'd quick hack the other while the other one regenerated. And it was really fast. Like, took me like 4 minutes. And, it was just really, really funny and a good one that I totally forgotten that is my most recent trophy.
That's a classic in terms of stealth action games, where they make the AI dumb on purpose because it's just more fun that way than if they were like super receptive, like, you know, regular people are. It would just make kind of the games impossible if they were like that. But yeah, I love when they're like, oh, it must be the wind or something, when they, you know, they basically see you like murder a guy, but it's like their alertness thing didn't fill up the whole way, so it's like so they don't actually know somehow, even though they definitely saw it, and that's why the alertness thing was going up in the first place. I know Dishonored and Deus Ex and basically like every stealth action game has like a similar thing. It's great for them to sort of meme and joke about it because, yeah, it's such like an ongoing joke in that genre.
It really is. And, you know, like I said, there's games that are getting way better at it. Like, for example, Hitman does not have like any situation like that. If somebody sees you doing something, it's alert. It's high alert. And it's like they find a body, it's high alert. You got to hide that stuff. You got to, you know, steal their clothes and do stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. Like, it's getting better, but it still is so funny to poke at the bad AI, and I thought it was really, really good. So I just wanted to throw that one out there. But
yeah, those
do you have any?
I feel like we had 2 really great achievements and trophies this week.
I do too. Those were fun. Do you have any final thoughts, AJ?
Not really. I think it's just, it's good to be back. I mean, hopefully this recording doesn't have problems.
Yeah,
and it's good to be back playing stuff, because now I'm like, I was kind of worried before, like, what if I don't have enough stuff to talk about? But now I know that I'm back into it, and I'm sort of hungry to play more stuff and to get more achievements. So it'll be good to talk again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, you don't worry about not having stuff to talk about. I mean, our conversation is so dynamic and fluid. I think that there's always something good to talk about, and we always have a topic on the table. You know. Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. Peace out and happy hunting.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to Complete Edition. If you like the content, consider supporting us on patreon.com/completionclub. If you have any questions or would like to reach us, email completionclub@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to Complete Edition.